And it took me to a point of having to decide, well, what do I want to do? Where do I go? I started meditating as a result of that. I started looking at the clothes I wore and wondering about that. I started looking at the business I was in at the time, which wasn't psychotherapy then. But anyway, I began to train to be a psychotherapist.
But how was it when you finished the trip and you had this incredible realisation and you were back, in quote, in normal life? Could you bring part of the experience with you?
Yes, and I remember trying to talk to Paul about it, trying to talk to everybody about it. I was like a missionary. I was saying, this is amazing. We don't realise what life is really about. We're just going along here as if this is it. And we are so tiny and so infinitesimal. And we are part of everything. And so I was trying to tell everybody this. And some people I discovered who also knew it. And I was looking, and I was looking for books, and a friend of mine said, read Aldous Huxley's book, the Doors of Perception and Heaven and Hell. I don't know if you've read Aldous Huxley. No. I read The Doors of Perception, and he described my acid trip in that book. Wonderful book, Aldous Huxley, I think, wonderful man. And he was on drugs at the time, as far as I remember. I think he was, but he wrote about it, and it was, yes, I'd found somebody who was describing what I'd experienced, and that was so wonderful because I'd felt very on my own with it. And then I met other people who'd also had some of these experiences, and I met some people who had had these experiences without drugs. And I felt I've got to be able to go to this without the help of the chemical. And I think that was what set me off. Now I'm not so worried about having that experience. It's part of me, I know it. So I'm not searching for a way to that experience then. But that experience then set me off on the road. And
that was Esalen you saw as a catalyst for developing that
very
side
much
of
so.
yourself.
San Francisco, not just Esalen. We lived in San Francisco. I used to go down to the Zen temple down there and meditate in the mornings. And we went to various groups. We went to Esalen, and I particularly loved Gestalt psychotherapy. I still love Gestalt psychotherapy. I'm still working as a therapist now, and one of the people who really influenced me most was Fritz Perls and his work in Gestalt, but also many other people who were practicing that work. And then I went on and I studied, as well as Gestalt, body psychotherapy, bioenergetics, and with Alexander Lowen and John Pirakos. John Pirakos is a wonderful man who is a very spiritual man too. And so I worked with both of them, and I did a training with them. And the body work was amazing because I think it taught me how as a tiny baby we begin to become so programmed, so conditioned to respond to what our parents want rather than what we want. And that the lifelong journey is going through that, not being the victim of our emotions and of our feelings. Somebody put it very beautifully to me once. I think it was guy called Charles, can't remember his son, I'll remember it in a minute. Anyway, he said, as a tiny baby, the baby is very much the victim of its own emotions, its own feelings. It doesn't have a choice, it just responds, which is wonderful. And that response doesn't fit with what's needed in society, with its teachers and its parents. So they teach it their form of control. And then the baby, from being the victim of their own emotions and their own feelings, becomes the victim of their control. And in the search that we go on to is finding our own way of being neither the victim of our control nor the victim of what Freud would have called the madness that we're born with, the id. So that was my quest from then on, and LSD was a part of it, and then Gestalt, bioenergetics, and a lot of meditation were what happened
next. And you trained
next.
in these subjects as well?
We trained in this, both Paul and I together, actually.
Yeah.
We both did that. And then we came back still really half-trained. I mean, we left that because we thought we'd had enough and we thought we knew it all and whatever. I'm still learning. I was arrogant in those days. Maybe I still am, I don't know. Anyway, we came back to London. We mainly came back because I was pregnant, because I'd bamboozled Paul into having children. He really didn't want children. But I just said to him, look, you know, I'm going to go if you don't have children because I really want babies. I was very clear I wanted 2 children.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Really,
yeah.
really clear.
Yeah.
And he said he didn't really want them. And I said, well, we've got to go. And I think there was, I don't know why he said, OK, I'll do it. I can't imagine. He says it's because of me, but of course it wasn't because of me. He did it because for some reason or other, on some level, he wanted these children too.
He wanted the same thing, yeah.
Anyway, we stayed together and we had 2 children. And at that point, I was pregnant when I came back to London. And we had 2 wonderful kids, by the way, and I'm now a grandmother, and that's great, but I won't go on with that. That's part of the journey too. So we came back, and there was nothing here that equalled what we had done in San Francisco. There was no such thing, really. It was embryonic, anyway. Humanistic psychology didn't really exist here. There was no centre like Esalen here. And so we talked to Mike Murphy, who was the guy who ran Esalen. And we said, look, we're going back, and we'd like to take some of this back with us. And he said, well, meet up with this guy, Leslie Elliott. He's got an awful lot of money, and you've got an awful lot of understanding of this whole thing. Get together with him and see what the 2 of you can, or the 3 of you can do together. The 2 elements. And we did. And Leslie was great, and he gave us somewhere to live. We came back penniless, pregnant, and whatever. And we set up Quaesitor, which was the first centre in Europe for humanistic psychology. And then we started to bring people across from the States, people we'd worked with, people we'd met in America, and introduced it to Europe, and that was the beginning of humanistic psychology here.
And was it successful, Quaesitor, as a business, did it?
Yes, indeed it was. I mean, we didn't leave Leslie for too long. He was great. I mean, he really provided the material part of us getting going, and set up the trips of the major people coming across to start us. And then slowly we kind of managed to stand on our own 2 feet, and we got it together, and it was successful, it was viable. And then we met a man, I must mention a couple of these names because they were quite important names, a man called Shyam Singer.
I used to know him well, yes.
He was a lovely man, an Indian man, and he was a great healer. And if he were here, he would be a wonderful person to be on one of your programs. Really into consciousness, into healing, and he has died. But Shyam said, I want to show you this particular meditation. And he showed us something called the dynamic meditation. And the dynamic meditation was directly from a man called Rajneesh Rajneesh, yes. He's now called Osho. He changed his name much later on. But for me, he was always Bhagwan because that was how I knew him. Anyway, so Shyam came out, and we were running a training course at the time. And he said, let me work with your trainees. Let me show your trainees. I won't imitate him because it would be considered non-PC these days. But he was wonderful because he spoke in that wonderful Indian way. And he was very inspiring.
He was very passionate about what he was.
Very passionate and very good-looking and wonderful man. Yeah. So Shyam pitched up and he did the dynamic meditation, and we were all quite burnt out because this dynamic meditation was about letting it all rip. You know, about screaming and shouting and cathartic. It wasn't about sitting quietly. It was about just letting all of that explosive stuff that is within us, from way back in the Freud bit, still that's with us, out so that we can reach a place of quietness and sit very quietly. I don't do it anymore, but I did it for a number of years. I did it every day for a long time. And I have to say that I have a very different way of working with anger now, which is, I could talk about a bit more, but I won't go into it right now. But a very different way. But in those days, it was exactly what I needed. I was just such a fiery woman.